Greetings all and welcome to another video. Recently I had the opportunity to sit down for an interview with Gregory Paul Martin. Gregory is an accomplished stage and film actor, writer, director, and producer, and is the son of Sir George Martin, known as the fifth Beatle, who produced the Beatles' music in the 1960s, as well as many of their solo projects. In the past few years, Gregory has gone public with his astrological practice, which he began at a very young age, and today is a master astrologer who's made incredibly accurate predictions and helped clients all over the world from all walks of life. In 2019, he released his book, Watch It Come Down: Human Consciousness, Astrology, and the Death and Rebirth of America. In our interview, we start by talking about Gregory's recent and upcoming projects in entertainment, the dynamics of how astrology works in our consciousness, the esoteric interests of the Beatles and his experiences in the studio with them, his overcoming black magic in his personal life, and we also touch on the true identity of Shakespeare and why his identity has been hidden for over 400 years, plus much more. Enjoy.
Well, I'm
Is that
traveling
right?
to the US. Yeah, I'm traveling to a lot of places in America. Um, I've been in New York. I'm going to New Orleans, and I'm going to Cancun in Mexico, and I'm going to Nashville, and I'm going to Los Angeles, and all because of several projects that are coming to a head in my world of entertainment, which I've been working on for years. And as you know, as I'm sure you know, as an actor, uh, so on the production side, sometimes these things, actually, the better something is, the longer it takes. That's the truth. And
Yeah.
so what's coming to head right now is a film that I wrote, began writing 7 years ago, about Jim Morrison of the Doors, that plays with the idea that he may have faked his death in 1971 and is still alive today. And it's called Strange Days, and it stars Johnny Depp and Emma Thompson, the British actress Emma Thompson, and Demi Moore. And it's all coming together now. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. And then this other project, which has taken 12 years because it's even bigger,
Wow.
which is what I think you're referring to. It's called The Circus. And The Circus is...
Yeah, that was it.
Right. The Circus is the madmen of rock and roll. The madmen, that's an elevator pitch. And when I say madmen of rock and roll, what I mean is that Mad Men was a great show about advertising in the 60s. And The Circus is the show. It's the greatest take on the truth of rock and roll in its golden age, when I was growing up around the Beatles, from 1967, The Summer of Love, to the death of John Lennon. And we'll probably go on beyond that, because it's going to be an amazing show. And it's like a Leviathan. It's a massive sprawling project with so many moving parts, which is why it's taken so long, because it's a story of the greatest. It's a fictional story of the greatest rock and roll band that never existed. So it's a parallel world in which there is a band that becomes as big as Led Zeppelin or the Stones, et cetera, et cetera. And their story from zero to hero, back again. But it involves real characters. For example, David Bowie, who was somebody I knew very well, unfortunately fortunately died, but he was going to play actor role in the show, which would have been wonderful. So there's all these people in music who are clamoring to be on board. It's like a playground for them, because it is recapturing the golden age of music. So everyone from Nile Rodgers, who's doing the music, to Tom Jones, even to Katy Perry, Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, everybody, Blur, Oasis, they're all part of it. And
Wow.
sort of it's finally come together now that Nile Rodgers is on board, because Nile Rodgers is not only, in my opinion, the greatest producer-songwriter living, but he also is Apple's first artist in residence, which is incredibly convenient for me, because because of Apple TV. I mean, that's the obvious first place to go with this. That's why I'm going to California to start pitching the show, and it's going to be a shoo-in, because when we walk in with
Right.
kind of people we have and the material we have, it's just and it's very interesting. I don't know if you probably didn't see this, but there was a show. It's very hard for some reason to capture rock and roll on television and film. I don't know why. If you spoke to Bono, or sting, they probably say that Spinal Tap is the closest thing to it, which is true. Even though it's satire, but
It's one of my favorite mockumentaries. One of my favorites. I've
oh
watched it so
yeah,
many times.
yeah.
It's great.
And it's very funny because at the beginning of the journey of the circus, I actually took this to Rob Reiner, who directed Spinal Tap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a long story why that didn't happen at that time, because I know he really wanted to do it. But I'm glad he didn't, because one of the things he said to me in the room, which is like a red rag to a bull to a great writer, is we could improvise the whole thing, which of course they did with Spinal Tap, and it worked. But this is different. Anyway, that's really what's going on that way. Thank you for asking.
Mm-hmm. No
But
problem.
we're here to talk other things, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's great, and we can get into how your world in the production world as a director, as a writer, influences your thoughts and your ideas as an astrologer. But yeah, I wanted to talk about your evolution, about in astrology, your ideas behind it, and how it relates to the world at large. You have some really fascinating ideas about where we're moving as a culture, specifically United States. In your book, Watch It Come Down.
Yeah.
And
by the way, I don't know if
it,
you've heard the news. Sorry to interrupt you.
I did.
About Trump? Yeah.
And so that plays perfectly into what your book. You spend a great deal of time,
yeah,
going at Trump and his chart. And so you're talking about his downfall. And here we have another step in his downfall just this evening. And so that really works. And you really go into his chart in depth, and you go into him as a person in your book. And I think it's great. And it's another stage in the de-evolution of the United States, but it's the death and rebirth. And
well, so that is very interesting. As you, I'm sure you know, as an astrologer, countries have charts, just like and companies have charts. I mean, if I always say to people, if not Steve Jobs, if Mark Zuckerberg had spoken to me before the Facebook public offering, which was absolutely disastrous, I would have told him, don't do it, because it's the moment was just awful in the chart. And so by the same token, the United States chart, which is very accurate, being the 4th of July, 1776 in Philadelphia at 5:10 p.m. In that chart, this is, the death and rebirth of America. And so it's like anybody, it's just built into the destiny of the country. It's supposed to be dying and being reborn, because it's so drifted so far away from its essential values that it has to crumble and fall apart in order to be a phoenix, reborn from the ashes of itself. That's why I find astrology incredibly reassuring and brilliant. One of the reasons, I'm sure you do too, because it's just destiny,
It's just how it's set up, how you could say the energetic structure of our realm works, how things play themselves out. They have to have cycles built into them, and everything that there's good things that happen, but nothing is good forever. Then you have to deal with the other parts of the chart that we don't live in this perfect world. So we all, in our own personal lives, but also, like you said, in lives or in the life of a country or a company, they're all birthed at a certain moment. So yeah, if you're in a board meeting and, okay, we're going to start this country, the moment that they sign that document, when it's officially initiated, it creates an energetic birth.
Absolutely.
And it's subject to all of the energetic rules that we all are subject to living in the world that we live in. And I was really interested in to ask, how did you get started being interested in astrology? You've mentioned that you were doing the charts of the Beatles at Abbey Road as some of your first the charts that you've done. But what made you? What grabbed your attention with astrology? Was it a book? Was it a person? Was it intuitive? What got you into it initially as such a young person?
Well, I'm a firm believer in everyone's born with certain talents, and some people kind of like, I was like a child prodigy at that, and writing and expressing myself. So I just was very precocious. I mean, like, in the sense that I had this ability. I don't know why. I mean, I definitely, it's just a thing, I mean, when you look at a person like Orson Welles, it's a similar kind of thing. And you yourself, all your gifts, obviously, they come with a package. And it just happened to be very early on with me that I was seeing things in the garden, and uh, yeah, I had an invisible friend who was definitely not of this world. I could see him, but other people couldn't. His name is Ronnie. And it sounds crazy, but this is the truth. And so for some reason, when I picked up a book, it was a book by a man called Alan Oken on astrology. It was a very big book, and I was able to read it, which most kids my age couldn't. And I just understood it, and I just understood it and became fascinated by it. And I did ask John Lennon behind my father's back, because my father was so conservative and so boringly practical in so many ways, as John Lennon would agree. That I couldn't do it. So I had to sneak it into. But I knew John Lennon was, as all the Beatles were fascinated by astrology and the occult of that time. And I did read his chart in the canteen at Abbey Road, and even though I didn't understand what I was talking about in a lot of ways as only 10, I did recognize his karma. I mean, as an adult, I can see what I was talking about then was his karma, his really difficult karma with women, women dying and controlling women and around him. And I definitely could sense the onset of the evil Yoko Ono. But I didn't, I didn't know how to quite express that. But at least I made a stab at it. But you see, for example, regarding this, I mean, it's an evolutionary thing. So you and I and certain other people my age are definitely like way ahead of our time, and sort of way shearers, old soul way shearers. And we all, by the way, have master numbers, as our life path in numerology. I'm a 448. So the double digits are always very, they're here to like guide humanity to the next stage. And so for example, I was just I'm reading this fantastic book, which you must read if you like music. It's by a man called Jeff Emerick, who is the Beatles' main engineer, working alongside my father, creating the music. And Jeff, honestly, as Elvis Costello says in the introduction to this book, he should rightly have been given the title of co-producer of Sgt. Pepper with my father, because he created so many of the sounds on the album. And Jeff was like my uncle. I mean, I've got pictures of me with Jeff. I mean, literally my best friend. And he's only 7 years. He was only like 13 years older than me. And the Beatles were into special effects. So the Beatles wanted a note on the end of Sgt. Pepper that only doggies could hear, because they like dogs. And so it was a very high-pitched sound, like a police whistle. And I could hear it. And I told my father I could hear it. And he said, nonsense. Of course you can't hear it. It's just that kind of thing. So, but these are just, I'm sure and you probably are yourself. I'm sure. Didn't you have a very interesting occult experience when you were young?
Yeah, I grew up as well in a conservative situation. I'm actually the only person in my family, in my extended family, that is interested in these things. I'm actually the only artist in my entire family that I mean, my aunt, who I actually looked up to, she was an artist, but I've always been drawn into things that other people weren't. But I did come later into astrology. But what I was always so intuitive to me was human psychology. And what always kind of came automatic for me was understanding why people did things and the motivations behind the way why people did certain things. So I think I was attracted to, I didn't come to astrology till later, but to doing film. I started doing my first small little movies when I was 8 or 9 years old.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I started doing it when I studied it in school, was doing little films with my friends, again, into university. But for me, it always came back to working with the actors, which was my favorite part of it. And really diving into the motivations behind the characters and what you can bring to the story from your own past and from your own history, and how we can make something really entertaining and interesting to watch. So what drew me I was so much into doing film and photography, having a visual eye, but I gradually became much more interested in doing theater, because In theater, you're really one-on-one with the actors, and my favorite part is doing rehearsals, and it's so much more direct with the personality and with the real depth of the story and the meat of the story. More so, where in film it's so much more technical and it's more planning and production. But in theater, you're really diving into it, and so gradually diving into more esoteric topics and themes, and just being a curious person, discovered the world of the esoteric, which wasn't so upfront with me as with you with the Beatles. When the Beatles at that time, George and well, the whole group going to India, but then growing into that kind of esoteric theme. Me, it took a little bit more time, but gradually as I grew into it, seeing that astrology is this method that explains how humans are, how human nature is, in an extremely accurate way.
Yeah.
And when you tie that in with how energy that we don't see, but one day we will be able to see, and some people, maybe as yourself, can actually see the subtle energies of the world. Well, astrology for me, it started to explain things into such a more profound level that other methods of psychology never did. I was taking advanced psychology when I was 15, 16 years old in high school.
Right.
And
well,
so,
you see, you were a child prodigy too. I mean, it's very clear.
Yeah. And just always having seeing something different going on in the world. I was always, like in my town, I was kind of portrayed as different or a hippie kind of thing. But it's just because people like myself weren't so common, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But I moved to New York. I did my thing, but eventually, I came to really appreciate more and more astrology because it's a direct way to see parts of yourself that we just don't have the language for in our current culture. And another question I would like to ask is, well, in your book, you really, so what I see is that nowadays more and more people are becoming, more and more young people are becoming interested in astrology, and people are looking for answers that traditional therapy doesn't give. And this is the most therapized, or the generation which has done the most therapy, this generation of children that is coming up now, and propagandized. And they have done the most therapy, but they're the most messed up generation that there is up until this point. And they have so many problems, and therapy is just exaggerating these problems. But in my opinion, astrology at the same time they're becoming very interested in astrology. And astrology is, in a sense, to use a theatrical term, waiting in the wings. It's almost like it's just waiting there for them to introduce young people to it. Look at this amazing spiritual science that it will actually show you to yourself.
Well, yes.
And so and so one thing that you do in your book is you actually go and you criticize bad astrologers who give astrology a bad name from bad predictions. So I guess my question would be, what can young people do, say as yourself, as growing up, and you were automatically interested, you were doing it from a young age. What can people do, or young people do, when faced with all the problems in the world and they want to get into astrology, but yet at the same time, there's so many ways to do it poorly, I guess. So I think astrology has just this great opportunity now, but it can be done very poorly.
Sure. The problem is that the trivialization of astrology. So there's a ton of millennials who are like into astrology, and you see all these mainly girls, talking on TikTok or whatever, all this stuff, and it's so superficial. It's ridiculous. I mean, and what they need to wake up. They need to wake up and understand, these people, that astrology is the most profound and ancient form of psychology, as you were saying. And so all of the soul's challenges and gifts in this lifetime are contained in the chart. So it's a massive tool for self-understanding. And that is why Carl Gustav Jung, the founder of modern psychology with Freud, used astrology with his patients as he used the I Ching and tarot cards, because these are also profound tools of divination that do not lie to you, and wrote and spoke repeatedly about the astonishing astonishing depth and power of astrology as a psychological tool of self-understanding. So it's not just about predicting, when am I going to win the lottery or have a baby. That there is that side to it, absolutely, no question about that. I've done this, and for example, I'll give you a great example of that. I only came out of the closet, so to speak, with astrology during COVID. My entire life prior to that had been a private thing for people in my industry who knew me, and but I wanted to help people because I saw the evil that was being forced upon, the terror struck into their hearts. And there was one woman who wrote to me, and she got my email address and wrote to me and said, would I read her chart because she was convinced she was dying of lung cancer, and she wanted some hope. And I looked at her chart, and I immediately could see that she was no way she was going to die. In fact, quite the opposite. She was going to have a complete recovery. And so it was very important she didn't listen to the doctors because they don't know what they're talking about. And literally 3 weeks later, she emailed me and said, I've got a clean bit of health. So, on a very practical level, you can see everything. But more importantly, it is a tool for self-understanding, and everybody has a dark side. And if you don't, as Jung, that was a primary driving thing for Jung, is the whole dark side and embracing the dark side and living out the dark side in a healthy way. It's just to actually prevent the kind of thing that's going on in the world right now with everything the World Economic Forum are doing, because obviously all these people are completely unexamined, if they are human at all, and I even doubt that with some of them. But discovering the dark side, using it creatively, is a key thing, and you can see that in the chart. I mean, for example, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the vast majority of very, very gifted actors and musicians have a hard aspect between the Sun and Neptune. Because if you are born with the Sun square Neptune, opposite Neptune, conjunct Neptune, in conjunct Neptune, it means, the Sun being the father, you do not know who you are fundamentally in the masculine way, because your father couldn't be there for you. And I have this, two friends of mine, Daniel Day-Lewis and Kevin Spacey, have it. Paul McCartney has it. David Bowie had it. It's astonishing. But you see that if you don't use that ability to be a chameleon, because what that means is that if you don't know who you are, even if you're a woman, if you don't know who you are in a masculine sense, you're gonna look for yourself in other people and be able to become like a chameleon. That's why it's a great actor's energy. But if you don't use it instead of it using you, you can become a drug addict, all the dark side of Neptune, a drug escapist in every way. Because it is a tool of escape. And it's also true that Jung had that aspect. So it forces someone to seek a spiritual path. That's how profound this is. And when you've got millions and millions of millennials, and I'm not knocking millennials, I just think they're lost. They need help, and they need it's like with voodoo, the whole thing. I will speak about that some other time, because I'm writing a book about black magic in my life, and the twist, the way voodoo is trivialized. I mean, this is a dangerous thing, and it's like cool. Voodoo is cool. Millennials think it's not cool at all, and by the same token, they're all talking about does my boyfriend's Venus aspect my Mars, all that stuff. And it's just such a skimming the surface of such a deep subject.
Right. Yeah. Simplifying it too much and wanting maybe materialistic validation, where it's really a searching for learning who you are on a spiritual level. And it's funny you mentioned the Sun, Neptune. I have the Sun, I think 48 minutes from Neptune. It's within 1 degree, something like that.
Well, there you go. You see, that's the great imaginative chameleon,
Right. And I've always thought of myself as adapting, and the chameleon thought. That was actually one of the first things I learned about my chart, was I have that conjunction and the ability to adapt and change. And it is powerful, and to be able to put on different masks I've been an actor. My only actual official stage role was Stanley Kowalski in The Streetcar Named Desire. It was my first.
That was a pretty great role.
Yeah, my first and only, and that was, and I acted in my own things afterwards. But yeah, it was a fascinating, great piece of writing from Tennessee Williams. Fun play to be in. But
why didn't you pursue it?
Well, I started doing my own things. I wrote my own things. I was doing some performance. So that was in college when I took a role when I was still in college for that role. But then I was much more into doing my own thing. And so I would fund my own projects. At the end, well, I was doing more theater and was taking on certain projects that were brought to me. And in the meanwhile, writing my own thing. So I did a couple small short plays in and around Manhattan. And then it ended up, I got into the Vedic literature, and the oldest book, one of the oldest books, the oldest texts, the Srimad Bhagavatam, I really dove into that. It's part of the Puranic literature from ancient India. And there are a few stories in that. And what basically the Vedas come down to is that you and your soul and your body are two different things, and who you are, your current identity and what your soul is.
Yeah.
And what the goal of life is to basically stop identifying with that finite part of you that will eventually die.
Right.
And to really realize who you are, which is all of consciousness within you.
Right.
And so, and the Bhagavad Gita gets at that. And so is the Bhagavad Gita connected with this larger mythological book, the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so I really was so knocked off my feet by the information in it. And I was doing so much theater at that time. I thought, I need to get this information out into the world. And so immediately I thought, this has to be a film. And I didn't want to do film at that time. But I thought, okay, and I was just it just struck me, people need to hear this information. It's something that people don't understand on a deeper level. So I spent the next year producing it. It took me a total of 4 years to write it, produce it, direct it. I'm an actor in it, edit it, and release it. And I released it on the conjunction date, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in 2020. December 2020, on the solstice date, actually, I think it was. Yeah, so that was, but my whole point was to show people that you are not your body. You're not who you think you are.
Yeah.
And in the meanwhile, I was getting so into learning about astrology, and the sun is the part of us that never changes. It's our soul's identity. Right. But what astrology is this covering to us. It's the psychological makeup we have, and there's a reason for it. It's for us to learn. Like, I think that the world is a school. I think the earth is a school. And to me, I kind of see astrology as this necessary, like kind of these psychological challenges and weaknesses and strengths that we all are born with, that help us to learn what we have to learn.
Exactly. It's like a map.
Yeah. And in a sense, as we're living now, we're creating our next chart for the next life.
Right.
And I think it's amazing to think about it like that. And you mentioned as well, what you say is that we have this freedom. And you were talking now that, well, an interesting topic that you bring up in your book is how some people lose their free will, and that, well, as we're living in our life now, we're kind of by our actions, by our thoughts, by our intentions, we're creating the chart for our next life. And some people, if they don't need to learn anymore, they can overcome this realm, and they don't have to be born again in this world, and they can be born again in another world. But that's a kind of a different topic. But we're all kind of essentially creating our next chart. We're creating our next map. But there are some people who become slaves to their chart, or become slaves to their own chart. And so one big kind of complaint, or not complaint, but one thing I noticed early on was people say, "Oh, I'm a Scorpio, and we always get revenge." And people use, and like, it's just kind of an excuse to be a bitch or something. And so,
it's so stupid. It's so stupid.
And people think they're just they're tied into their chart, and it never changes. Whereas it's
which is rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. And look, there's the rub right there. There is the rub, and that's the point. And that's why I came out of the closet and started talking to people during COVID and created such a stir, because I'm so fortunate in this sense that I just have this a very unique, very advanced perception of how astrology should be used. And frankly, I'm going to be very honest here, and you have to forgive me because I am Celtic and I am an actor. So I do, you know, and I have the same birthday as the great British comedian Benny Hill. So I can be very crude sometimes. But so many astrologers I've learned couldn't find their ass in a well-lit room. They couldn't find their ass in a well-lit room. What they're doing is they're not helping people at all. What they're doing is they're parroting books they've read and courses they've studied at colleges. I mean, because I never went to, you know, never went to any college in my life for astrology or anything else. I mean, well, for acting I did, but I mean, that was it. Because you just know what you don't know. And, you know, astrology, like anything else, is an art that is evolving. So, man, I know a little girl. This is amazing. I know a little girl who knew about the asteroids Haumea and Eris before they showed up. You know, she drew in a picture of them. So, I mean, you know, wow. So in other words, well, you know, just as we're discovering new heavenly bodies all the time, like Haumea, who's so important in somebody's chart because she is literally fertility and the divine feminine principle, the Mary Magdalene principle, which is going to save humanity. That's why she's been discovered now. By the same token, one's perception of astrology is constantly evolving. And I realized, you know, when I was about 27, I created, by using my mind, as the Bible says, be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind. The mind is everything. We literally do create our reality every second. And that's the purpose of being alive, is to understand that and learn to control it and therefore become a master. That's why the miracles in the Bible that Jesus performed are real. So I developed this mind training, I call it, which made me achieve incredible things in entertainment, in particularly when in 1984 and 1985. And I'm not going to go into that now, but it was an astonishing experience, and it made me realize I call it total power and dominion because that's what we are all here to achieve. That is not over other people, but over ourselves, and that is the Christ spirit. That's what the miracle energy, and that's why we're all here. And that's why we're in the middle of the apocalypse. Those of us who are going to understand that and become, you know, the Christ spirit are going to, so they call ascend, and the others aren't. But that was, you know, when you combine that training, which I've taught to certain people and watched incredible transformations in their lives with their astrology, you know, you've just got a killer recipe for living your life. I mean, for example, there was a woman who came to me from Brighton in England. And she wanted not only me to read her chart, always came from Twitter of all things, because it was a platform I chose. And but she wanted to study astrology with me, and she's a real estate person, and she's very good at what she does. And so I said to her, you know, you should also do this total power and dominion mind training because it's basically what Joe Dispenza is teaching and Tony Robbins is teaching, except I do it much faster and much cheaper because you don't have to spend all this money with these people because you know that's like a business. So she did it, and she is now not only one of my best friends in the entire world, but she's the COO of my company, and I made her my COO because she was so transformed by doing the total power and dominion training and using it with astrology that, you know, I'd be crazy not to hire her. So the idea is to bring out the brilliance of oneself. So the truth of the matter is this. The chart shows, in my opinion, the chart shows the inevitable energies that will unfold in your life day by day, hour by hour with the moon, day by day, year by year with Pluto, the larger planets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no question. That is your set destiny. That is your karma. You can't avoid that. You can't get around it. However, you have infinite choice of probability according to how you react to those energies and allow them to dominate you or you dominate them. So, for example, a very trivial example, I'm in a hotel room outside JFK. I've got Jupiter trine the sun right now for the rest of the week, which is fantastic. So I'm feeling really great. But I also, this weekend, and I can see this coming, I have Saturn, the sun, and Venus opposite Saturn in financial houses, which is a fucking doozy. Excuse my language, but it is. I mean, financially, there's going to be something going on. And sure enough, there's something going on. My British bank account has been frozen for 5 days. I can't access my money. My PayPal account has also been frozen. It's just crazy. But it's not driving me mad because, as Tony Robbins says correctly, you know, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. I mean, it's just silly. It's just like forewarned is forearmed. So it's sort of a very useful tool. However, to go back to my point about we have choice all the time, we live in a multiverse. That is why, which means there are infinite probable Earths, infinite probable futures, infinite probable presents and pasts. Literally, that's what we're doing. If we don't dominate our minds, we are literally being led by our unconscious beliefs in and out of different realities all the time, all the time. But the moment you get on top of your mind and live what I call total power and dominion, you choose, you dominate, you choose, no matter what's going on. No matter if you got, horrifying, one of the worst aspects going on, like Pluto square Saturn, it doesn't matter. You'll dominate that and you'll use it in a very positive way. And that's the difference. Most astrologers are very fatalistic.
Yeah, the fatalism part. Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're saying that it's all about the reaction that you have. We're living in this life, and this life has we have a given chart, and then we have these given transits,
right?
And how we react, like kind of our mental approach to the the external situation, the internal, maybe you could say an internal focus. Okay, this is happening around me. Well, I'm going to react to it this way. Yeah. And then would you say that from that internal perspective, putting a new intention towards the reality to then maybe make your external situation shift itself in certain ways and put a certain intention out so that, well, all of the transits are happening in a certain way, but then the next time a certain transit happens, it can be altered. It's altered from what you've intended previously. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But here's the thing: it's not about putting out an intention, because that's like a weak wing prayer to me. It's about actually actively, aggressively living each moment as if it were your last, which is why in all the great shamanic traditions they speak about death stalking you, because death is stalking you. Death is over your right shoulder every time. There is no such thing as security. We are here for a very brief time. Time is an illusion. This is a journey that you're on that's actually a great, great gift, a great, great dream. And if you live as if death is stalking you, as if each moment is your last, you really come on heavily with your attention. It's like times on steroids. In other words, so you have to redefine yourself, redefine your life script, and that's what total power and dominion is. It's really about. It is basically extremely positive mind control, where you're literally becoming no matter what is happening in your life, you are becoming that person constantly who you've always wanted to be, and you actually are that person in the present. So nothing shakes you, nothing nothing bugs you whatsoever. And furthermore, if you understand astrology and you have a great teacher, you understand that every so-called difficult situation, like I was involved in a car accident a few days ago, but I knew that it was what the purpose of it. And I was mugged in Barcelona 4 days before they lost my thumb. Oh, wow. But it serves a purpose, so that's what it's really all about. And the thing is that you can actually have and do whatever you want at any moment of your life. That's the truth. And I really mean that, literally. And I don't mean obviously just materially, although that is obviously perfectly true in the case. But I mean in the spiritual realm too. There are definitely periods when you can see someone's life changing, like someone getting more profound spiritually, or certainly someone going through the trials of Job, which I did at one point. But fundamentally, the whole thing is right there for you to have at any moment. You just have to step into your power, which is all psychological. It's all about self-creation. And I always say to people, if I tell you, like, an actress came to me a few months ago, and it was such a relief, because I really like talking to actors. It's my business. It's such a relief in talking to people who are so into extraterrestrials and reincarnation and all that stuff. And it's just too much. The other side, the new age thing, it just gets very wearing to me, because I'm a very practical person. I mean, I understand that and I appreciate it, but she's an actress, so and she's a good actress, and she's beautiful. And I was very excited for her, because I could see in her chart that not only that she was connected to me, because one can see one's connections with other people, but also that she was entering a period that was so fortunate. It was crazy. I mean, if you're an astrologer, so you'll understand. She's coming right into Pluto, trine the Sun, trine Mars, and the progressed Sun conjunct Jupiter at the same time. It's crazy, like crazy stuff. And I said to her, I said, Emma, there's only one way you can fuck this up. You can fuck it up if you don't believe what I'm saying and you haven't put in the work to dominate your mind, total bound dominion. Because if you don't do that, you'll experience all the goodies like Robert Hand. He's a very gifted astrologer, as you know, one of only half a dozen I expect in the entire world. He writes about Pluto trine the Sun as rewards on a silver platter. My father had that when he met Brian Epstein. I mean, it's really true. Of course, like anything else. So if she doesn't have an incredible, she should win 3 Oscars. Or 4, more than Daniel Day-Lewis over the next few years. Either she's subconsciously sabotaging herself because she hasn't worked on her mind, she hasn't done the work we're here to do, or, and this is the very rare case, and this is why I'm writing this book called Blackbird about black magic, she's under the spell of black magic. Because if you are under black magic, and it is very rare, your chart will not unfold the way it's supposed to. And I know that from direct experience. It's really true. Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah. So that kind of that brings into, I wanted to ask you about that, and it kind of brings into a couple questions. One is, well, you've done charts of well-known individuals, and you've done plenty of charts of people who aren't well-known. My question is first, say quote unquote famous people, they use astrology, I'm assuming. And why don't we hear more from those individuals say, yeah, I have this great astrologer, you should do it? How come that in the media, just a regular, like a famous individual, quote unquote, not that they're better than other people, but
no,
I
definitely
guess
not.
yeah, and I guess I just get bothered sometimes that we hear that even the financial elites or the political elites, oh, they secretly use astrologers, and the controllers of the world, they secretly use astrologers. Do they? And this kind of gets into the black magic part. Are they maybe slaves to their charts? Are they using astrology in manipulative ways? And I guess maybe on a practical note, are these well-known individuals, you've mentioned you've done Johnny Depp's chart and stuff, how come they're not more forward about saying, yeah, I've got this great astrologer, you should try it, you should find a good astrologer, you know what I mean? I guess that kind of frustrates me, that it's so under the surface still.
And it's like the millennials doing their silly apps with I mean, that's really silly. That's the marital stuff and the you can't say just because you're a Libra you're going to get along with only just Aquarians and Geminis. It's so dumb.
It's so extremely simplistic, right?
Yeah, and in fact, I might develop an app that's much more sophisticated than that in the future. But be that as it may, I understand what you're talking about, of course. Well, I think it's different horses for different courses. In certain cases, people like Johnny just don't want to discuss that, and they have every right not to discuss it. When I was, the kind of thing I would do prior to, most of my life is, for example, with someone like Simon Fuller, who created the Spice Girls and American Idol. I knew him just because my father gave him his first job as a T-boy in his office. And, he asked me if I would do his daughter's chart when she was born, which is always fascinating. I mean, children's charts are fascinating. So, I don't know why they don't talk about it, honestly. It's just, I think some of them just don't want to be, seen as like woo-woo new age people. I mean, I think it's part of it. I don't think
maybe
that people,
it's extremely personal too. Maybe it's like saying, oh, this is what my therapist was telling me. You don't, I guess psychoanalysts, oh, this is my psychoanalyst. Astrology is in a similar vein. It's like, it's very, very personal, I guess you could say.
It's very personal. And I honestly don't. Look, a lot of it's true that, J.P. Morgan, 100 years ago, astrology was much more understood and much more popular. And that's the reason why J.P. Morgan, who was the first billionaire in America, actually in the entire world, I think, said very famously that astrology is not for millionaires, it's for billionaires. Because if you understand it correctly and you're in the money game, a great astrologer will make you a fortune, because they'll tell you exactly when to make that play, which is why 30 or 40%, I would say, of stockbrokers on Wall Street use astrologers. That's why people are always ringing me up and say, what should I do with this, that, and the other? I mean, I had a guy come to me 2 to 3 days ago. I spoke to him as a result of a radio show I did. And, this guy is going to make a fortune in Bitcoin. And, I said to him, look, the next 10 days, something risk you got to take it, because it's really going to pan out. But I don't think the elites use it in a dark way, because you can't use it in a dark way, you see. I mean, how can you use astrology in a dark way? I don't understand. You can use black magic in a dark way to fuck the people up, and therefore they won't manifest their own chart, which is what happened to me for many years, and that's why I'm writing the book called Blackbird. But you can't use astrology to dominate somebody else or dominate your own life. You can only use it for self-understanding and self,
Right. Yeah. I mean, in that sense, because there's a lot of people make these claims that, the people who control the financial and the political systems, they don't do anything without knowing, without the approval of the stars, so to say. And just not to harp on this thought, but just for example, like the entire the war in Israel, that was all done under an exalted Mars, and that whole
true.
situation that it's kind of making sure that the stars align to
that's different. Yeah, I agree with that.
to do a certain event. Okay, let's wait until this is and another example is that Mars is going to be debilitated this year, and then retrograde debilitated, which could then cause people's defenses to go down. So that could be another great opportunity if your motivation is to control people, because people's ability to fight back will be, or the defenses will be down. So do you know what I mean? So
now, and I'm quite sure you're right about because that is the aim about Israel and the war, because that is the way ancient astrologers used to advise kings. Like the whole thing with eclipses and no, absolutely. Yeah, in that sense, yeah. What I was saying was, I don't think you can't use a chart against a person. But certainly with a general thing like that, Mars retrograde and debilitated, yeah, that's a great moment to take advantage of people in general, I'd say, yeah.
Right, yeah. And so you're talking about the black magic, and it's really interesting because I was looking up, you had kind of written it was a memoir, or you had kind of written it, and then you didn't want to publish it yet, but now you're rewriting and expanding it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because you were mentioning in other interviews your stepmother. And I think it's interesting if you'd want to maybe comment on how, maybe not too personally, but how that would make it. Sounds like you're saying it can kind of obstruct a natal chart, but it's also interesting too that Yoko Ono, she was obsessed with astrology, if I'm not mistaken, and John seemed a little bit blasé. He kind of let her do her thing. I've heard that he was much more, he just liked reading the newspapers, doing his own thing, smoking marijuana, and he kind of let her run the show. I guess it's kind of the gist.
He wanted a mother.
Yeah, to take care
of her.
But
he called her mother at the end of his life.
Wow, I had no idea, but I've heard that their relationship was terrible, but that she was, a witch. She was. Well, I don't know if she was a black musician or black magician, but I guess I'm just bringing it up just to kind of tie in with what your experience was.
No, sure. Well, I would say that Yoko is, since she's alive, an amateur witch. She's a dabbler. She's a dilettante. She tries. I mean, she's fascinated by everything: astrology, numerology, black magic. You name it. But she's certainly a very dark person, and she certainly controlled John Lennon. In fact, I was going so far as to say that she might even have had him shot because she was giving. His last album flopped. I don't think she knew quite what to do at that point because the last album was not selling well. There's nothing that sells better than death, as they say in Spinal Tap, and it's true, death sells. And I mean, look at Marilyn Monroe and James Dean. I mean, it's like, and she was having an affair with Sam Havertoy at that point, and she definitely started giving John's clothes to Sam. It was all very weird. And I do know this. I'll tell you this about Yoko. When I say amateur, what I mean is that she's not really a witch. She's not that. I mean, I could completely wipe the floor with Yoko Ono because in terms of magic, because I had to learn that to defend myself against my stepmother, who's like was a pro. I mean, like she was like Cassius Clay, my stepmother,
Wow.
and in terms of her ability, and but what Yoko would do, and this is absolutely 100% truth because I have it from the mouth of May Pang, who was really the only woman that John ever truly loved. Yoko would go to South America, which is like, Cuba, Haiti, South America is the hotbed of, in Africa, the hotbeds of voodoo. And, you can hire a voodoo priest. You hire a voodoo priest like a lawyer. I mean, they'll give them enough money, they'll defend you or they'll attack somebody. I mean, it's just all that stuff. And she found some extraordinary person, apparently, and because she wanted to, make sure she made a mistake, by sticking May Pang on John Lennon to watch over him. After John left her, she never figured that he'd actually fallen in love with May Pang, which he did. So she had to break up the marriage and the relationship. And May told me that they were. I'm sure this is in the film that May Pang has just done. I hadn't seen it, but she said that she and John were in an apartment in New York, and it's the night they saw a UFO over New York City. It's a very famous story, and John said that he had to go back to the Dakota building. Just grab some things. They were about to buy a house upstate New York. He's going to go back to Dakota to grab some things and just wrap it up with Yoko forever, And of course, he went back on a Friday night. He never came back. And eventually he came back on Monday morning. And May said he looked completely different. And he had this weird bottle of what she called perfume around his neck. Wow. That when John opened, he said, "What is that?" And John said, "Oh, Yoko gave it to me." And when she opened the bottle, it smelled awful, she said. And that's a classic way of, putting, influence on a person who's by a certain concoction that you put around their neck and tell them it's good luck, or whatever stupid like that. So that's the kind of thing that she would do, But my stepmother was, as I said, was Cassius Clay, and that's a very different thing. And so she definitely put a stop to a lot of things that were supposed to occur in my life because she hated me so much and was so threatened by me. But I eventually dealt with her, and that's what you have to do when you go up against someone like that.
Right. Yeah. And kind of what you're saying, an individual becomes more valuable dead than alive. And you can think of so many people in the entertainment industry like that. What comes to mind to me was Prince. There were certain songs by Prince that I'd never heard. And then all of a sudden one day I was in a Chase bank and I heard this song and I had never heard the song Raspberry Beret before. And all of a sudden,
yeah, great song.
That sounds like Prince, but I've never heard this song. And it was a couple months after he died, and so now everything he's ever done is now released in public on Spotify. But I remember looking for his music on YouTube, and he had an extremely his policy was that he didn't release anything of his own music that he was not in control of. And but yeah, anyway, so I have heard that too, that Yoko was, John's bodyguard stood down that night, or it was actually his bodyguard that did it. She seems, I think her music.
Well, she was so determined to develop the brand John Lennon. I mean, and the best book to read actually is Albert Goldman's book, The Lives of John Lennon. That's the best book to read, which created such an outrage when he published it because he told the truth about John Lennon, and he was determined to do it. And,
was that his assistant, his temporary assistant? Was that him?
No, Albert Goldman he's dead now. Was a biographer, a very, very good, fine biographer. But you're talking about what was his name? I know you're talking about. He actually stole some memoirs of John from Dakota. Because he wanted to tell the truth about what he'd seen, and Yoko really went after him, of course, and won. I can't remember his name. He was also called Sam, I think, and you definitely can find him on the internet. He's sort of quietened down now, but desperate people will do desperate things. So Yoko is very desperate. She doesn't want the world to know who she really is, but she is a monster, and she was responsible for breaking up the Beatles. And I've got a very funny story to tell you about that. Actually, when the Beatles were recording their last album, John was completely nuts. Really, I mean, he was brilliant, wonderful man, but completely out of his mind. And when Yoko had a miscarriage, he so wanted to have her in the studio with him. He had a bed ordered from Harrods to be wheeled into the studio, so she'd lie in bed. I mean, how depressing to try to make music with Yoko Ono lying in bed with a goddamn tiara on. I mean, come on. And the Beatles were very like down to earth Liverpudlians, and they were very proprietary about their snacks. John had his organic whatever because of Yoko or whatever, and George had his ginger snaps, and Ringo had his nuts and all that stuff. And nobody would touch anybody else's snack. That was the rule. Then they all went up to the control room to listen to a playback of a song with my father, and Yoko was alone in the studio with a tiara, lying in bed, and George Harrison, because I was there, I saw this. I must have been like 12. George Harrison looked out of the control room window, and he said, "That fucking bitch, she's eating my cookies," because Yoko had gotten out of bed and had one of his ginger snaps.
Oh man, so it was very palatable in the studio when you were there, and I'm sure with your father as well. It was.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about the tension, I guess, in those last times, and Yoko just feeling that, oh, I can just do whatever I want. I'm going to be here. It doesn't matter. I'm going to break. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she wanted to break the Beatles up, but
I think she definitely did. I mean, Paul McCartney, who's such the ultra diplomat, would never admit that now, but he knows it. And she definitely influenced John to do that. I mean, John was the one who said I want a divorce, but it was definitely I mean, she ruled his life. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And she just didn't want that to go on any longer. And that's what happened. But it's like, I think my brother, Giles, who does all the Beatles stuff, they found some tape recently, long lost tape of the Beatles talking after Abbey Road about what they're going to do next. It wasn't, completely, they were having real difficulties because they're all grown up. But, they wanted it to go on. It just became eventually too much. And it was an awful thing. And by the way, I sort of do want to talk about this, but let's just talk about it for a second. This is why it makes me so angry to have encountered over the past few weeks the craziness, the absolute insanity of this Beatles conspiracy stuff that's going around that extends from Paul McCartney dying in a car crash in '67 or whatever, to the Tavistock Institute creating the Beatles as a structure like Jeffrey Epstein to destroy society. I mean, how can you say the Beatles destroyed modern society? My God, the music was absolutely stunning. And I was in the studio watching them writing the goddamn stuff, right? Are you telling me that somebody else wrote the lyrics? I mean, this is what all these mad people believe. The Billy Shears. And the funny thing about that is, the irony is that I actually wound up narrating a book that has become the Bible of these crazy people. It's called The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And it's by a man called Tom U. Harriet. And I did it because I thought it was a satire. He asked me, he found out that I did who I was, that I did a really good Paul McCartney impersonation. Obviously I do, because I'm a talented actor and I've known him since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. So I was having fun. And he said, would you narrate this book? And I said, if you pay me enough money, I will. Sure, why not? It sounds interesting. But I didn't realize, it was only when I got to the end of the book and he asked me to write and I realized there was something strange going on, because Phil, when you do voiceover work, this, I mean, it's quite challenging to get it really perfect. And, we didn't have much time because he didn't have much money. And but at the end of the book, there was this long list of names, including people like Aleister Crowley, but names of people I'd never heard, really ancient names, and endless, like 3 pages. And to do that is very difficult to do when you don't know what the names are. And then I thought, well, this is kind of getting a little bit weird. And when the whole thing was finished, he said to me, "Would you write a prologue or whatever, an introduction?" I said, "Sure," but I said, "Just want to ask you a question because I want to explain, Tom, that the whole time I've been doing this, I've been thinking that this is a kind of satire because to me it's palpably ridiculous." He said, "I said, do you actually believe it?" He said, "Oh yeah," and that I'd already done the thing. So that's why it's kind of funny that I'm in the melee of this, because it's my heritage, it's my father, it's for people who, for whatever reason, found themselves in a position to develop as songwriters, like at the speed of light. As my father said, they developed like hothouse plants because they couldn't write a song to save their lives when they met him. But they were driven enough and talented enough, and particularly Paul McCartney, who's absolutely a genius. I mean, it's like, that famous quote when John Lennon was asked at one press conference, "Do you think that Ringo Starr is the best drummer in the world?" And he said he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles, because that was pure Paul,
Because Paul was,
Yeah.
Paul could play
And
as
that's
well.
not Billy Shears.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting
Subculture.
theory, and well, your father was right in the middle, and your father, as being the quote unquote fifth Beatle, he was a major figure, and he was extremely important in developing the Beatles.
Yeah.
But from my understanding, it was him and Paul that were kind of the dynamic duo, say more even so than Paul and John. It was your father and Paul that had a really great rapport together. When you were in the studio, did you see them working together a lot, or?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And after the Beatles too. I mean, and this is something else that makes me mad. I've had an extraordinary life, and I've worked as an actor, and I'm working still as an actor and writer director with some great artists like Johnny Depp, Jim Carrey is another one. I've met some fantastic actors and musicians from the past, including Marlon Brando, who I hung out with for a long time. And actually, Marlon Brando sang yesterday to me in his backyard, which is kind of very interesting.
He's my favorite actor, by the way. Marlon,
and a fantastic human being.
Marlon, he was really into psychoanalysis. He was a deep individual. I really like that guy. Yeah,
very profound, which is why one of the reasons he became the best friend of Michael Jackson. And that's where I'm going with this, because all this stuff about, and this goes to Kevin Spacey too, is a very close dear friend of mine. I mean, all this stuff about Michael being, this pervert, this child molester, et cetera, is so untrue. And and what really bugs me is these people know nothing. They were never in the room with any of these people. They never actually spoke to them. I mean, they know nothing, and they're such easy targets. So, for example, one of the best things my father did with Paul after the Beatles was 2 albums, Tug of War and Pipes of Peace. And those are the albums that contain the tracks Say, which Paul wrote with Michael Jackson, and Ebony and Ivory, which Paul wrote with Stevie Wonder. So I was there when they were doing Say, and Paul's son was then a very little boy, and Michael used to play with him in this big cardboard box that was like in the hallway of Air Studios, my father's studio, between takes, because Michael didn't have a childhood. That's why he was childlike. That's why he created Neverland. That's why he had no childhood. He was a slave to his parents, but he wasn't a pervert, Yeah,
I remember I read a quote somewhere that one of one of his biographers swore that Michael died a virgin, and he was very adamant about that. And something about that hit me like, wow, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. He was obsessed with returning back to his childhood. And there's a lot of people that put a lot of circumstantial evidence together. And I think Michael maybe had been surrounded by nefarious characters. There were some Kabbalistic people, and that could get access to young children. It was something that I didn't want to dive into just because it's so dark.
Yeah.
But there's something about Michael that was, he, it's almost you don't, not to pity him, but you look at him like, man, he must
No.
have had a tough life because
Yeah.
look, yeah, look how he had to he changed his external world. He
Yeah.
seems so innocent, and at the end of his life, he was maybe another example of an individual that was worth much more dead than alive. I mean, he was starting to criticize. I mean, he bought the Beatles' music, if I'm not mistaken, or he bought the
Yeah,
rights
that's
for
right.
it, and he was starting to criticize record executives very forcefully, and his fate, I maybe was sealed, and just kind of makes it seem like the record business, the music industry, how how do they have how are they able to order people to be killed? And it's something that I guess bothers me too, is like I was saying earlier, is saying that the elites and whatever, they're so powerful, and they use astrology, and they're these master astrologers, and what how do you know that, and how, like, show me in a chart where, like, what they did. If you look at to me, there's not much evidence to back that kind of claim up, that they just do everything by the books, and they do everything by the astrology book, and they don't move a finger without counting on the stars. I think a lot of it is unverifiable, big claims that people make about these kinds
Yeah.
of things. It's character assassinations,
Yeah.
and it's not to say
Well,
that certain people don't use black magic, but
oh yeah.
I,
Now
I
that now
hear
that
there's so many rumors, I guess you could say, these days because of the internet. Of
Yeah. Well, that's it. And so certainly black magic is much more prevalent than you think, particularly among millennials. Which I say it's very dangerous because they don't know what they're doing, and it's not funny. I mean,
Yeah,
literally, I mean, I could kill you right now if I wanted to. Literally, by at a distance of whatever we are, I could kill you because I know how to do it. I've been taught how to do it, but of course, I never do that because I'm not that. I don't fight for that side. Um, and the greatest story about black magic, and again, I'm saying that because I had to learn how to deal with my stepmother in order to get her off my back. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing now. That's how much she hated me. That's why the book is called Blackbird, by the way, and because she's the blackbird, and every chapter of the book is a Beatles song. It's about my life, my experience with that, and everything else to do with the Beatles growing up. But the greatest story I could tell anyone about black magic, which definitive proof, is about my dear friend Alberto Violdo. Now, but you know who he is?
Albert, who?
Alberto Violdo.
I don't know. No.
Okay, well, Google after the call. Google Dr. Alberto Violdo, Villoldo, the Four Winds, like the wind that blows, the Four Winds plural society.com. Now, Dr. Alberto Violdo, I've known since I was 30. We shared everything together, hotel rooms and women, because Alberto's Cuban, and when he was younger, he was a bit of a lad. But he's truly a great, profound healer, and there's nothing that's wrong with a healer being a very sexual human being. In fact, many of them are. That's part of the sexual energy, is part of the power of a shamanic healer. So anyway, Alberto is the man who brought Inca shamanism to the West, specifically from Machu Picchu. And he now has a fantastic 5-star healing retreat in Chile with his wife, who's also a great healer. And they take groups of people to the rainforest to experience ayahuasca under controlled conditions, which is the only way it should be done, with a person who knows what they're talking, real ayahuasca, and the Machu Picchu, et cetera, et cetera. And I recommend anybody to go on one of these trips because it's absolutely fantastic. So Alberto, in one of them, and by the way, the first book of Alberto's, he's written many books. Everyone should read because I'm producing it as a movie right now. It's called The Dance of the Four Winds, or The Dance of the Four Winds if you're American. And it's a story of how he became initiated into shamanism, how he went from his college in San Francisco. He got paid to go on a sabbatical to investigate, shamanism, and it reads like an anthropological thriller. It's brilliant. But in his second book, he tells the story of how being Cuban, his half Cuban, half American. He was raised in Havana and his nanny was a voodoo priest. So he was raised around it, but he didn't really. He was very kind of Western and skeptical of magic in any form. But he did obviously know about it because his nanny was a voodoo priest, and he eventually wound up at San Francisco, I'm sure, University of California in San Francisco, with a man called Stanley Krippner, doing investigations into it's deep psychology to do with death and after death. And he got a grant from the university to go to Haiti, which is the true hotbed of voodoo, to investigate voodoo because he wanted to find out for himself whether this was a reality or not. So he went to Haiti, and I'm just sort of paraphrasing the story. He had an American handler, handler's the wrong word, but an American who was taking care of him there, who was connecting him with one of the most powerful voodoo priests in Haiti. And Alberto said to the man, I want to do a bet with this man. I want to disprove that voodoo is reality. So I want him to try to hurt me at a distance. So they went and met the old man, and the old man didn't speak English, so the American was translating for Alberto and told him he wanted to do a bet with him that he couldn't hurt Alberto when he went back to San Francisco at a specific moment in time, and he was willing to to bet him $200. And of course, the old man thought that was a great idea and just laughed until because he said, "You think so? Huh?" I mean, So anyway, what the agreement was that each the $200 would be paid to whoever the man was right, and it was agreed that at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, a week after Alberto returned to San Francisco, that this man would attack him psychically from Haiti. And so Alberto, being the sort of like jovial bon vivant that he is, decided to have a dinner party to celebrate because he knew in his mind he was going to win. And sure enough, 8 p.m. came around and nothing happened. And so his friends just raised the glass and toasted him and just laughed and said, "You won, Alberto." Then the phone rang, and it was the American go-between from Haiti. And he said to Alberto, "I need to apologize to you because the gentleman had a problem this evening. He had to deal with a family problem, so he wasn't able to do the attack on you. But he'll do it tomorrow night at the same time." And so Sunday night, Alberto was alone in his apartment, staring at the clock. And at 8 o'clock on the dot, he began to feel this terrible pain in his stomach and back. Just like, I'm not sure if you've ever had a kidney stone, but it's the most awful thing, like someone stabbing you in the back. It's the most excruciating, like that. And it just increased and increased and increased and increased to the point where Alberto had to crawl across the floor. He didn't have a cell phone those days, and got to the phone so he could pick up the phone and call the guy, and he said, "Beg him, tell him to stop."
Wow. Yeah,
Right.
incredible. And I guess if the spells, if that's what they call them,
Yeah.
you can do anything.
Well, exactly. Exactly. You see, in my case, I mean, as some rather silly woman in my life, someone said to me, "Well, but she could have killed you. She didn't kill you." I said, "She didn't want to kill me. You don't get it. She wanted to
Wow.
see me suffer for the rest of my life and then die. That's how mean she
Wow.
was."
That's to torture you psychologically. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
an individual like
She
that.
wanted
It's
to
not
take
enough to just kill
everything that was
someone.
mine from me. Everything that was mine from me. And when I once went, and when I realized that this was happening was actually, I mean, because so many things had gone so bizarre in my life for several years. It wasn't until 1995 when actually I was having an affair with a Brazilian woman who lived in Sao Paulo, and she was a brilliant astrologer, and she was also a very wealthy person. She was married to the head of Citibank, and she'd gone back to Sao Paulo for New Year's Eve, and I was in West Hollywood, and I called her at midnight, and she sounded really strange. And I said, "What's the matter, Monica?" And she said, "It's so strange." I said, "Well, what?" She said, "Well, I went to see this man, some like St. John of God, or some very famous Brazilian shamanic, visionary psychic guy for a reading, and all he talked about was you." I said, "Well, what?
Wow.
That's very interesting. Why? What do you say?" He said, she kept saying so strange. She said, she said, "He told me that I was with a man who was a brilliant man, who was supposed to had a brilliant father, and was supposed to have this incredible career in like a Renaissance man. He was so gifted. He is so gifted. And he said, but some woman in his life has done something to him, not a girlfriend, an older woman, and that if he doesn't do something to solve the problem, he'll never have anything that's supposed to be his.
Wow. So it was a completely unrelated person. Was
Yeah.
that was that the first time that you were indicated
Aware of
that?
it. Well,
Wow.
I things had gone very bad and consistently, but I didn't. This was an initiation. Look, everything that happens in your life that's really difficult is an initiation. So, in this lifetime, I was being initiated into this level of darkness by my stepmother. So I was not aware that people could do that. So this kind of really shook me, and
Wow.
it was very interesting because another person who I went to have a conversation with after this, because I was so shaken by it, she told me that she had a vision of my stepmother straddling my body while I was asleep, as scooping
Good
out
Lord.
money from my chest.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, she, so not to give away any spoilers for the book because I'm really
Well, we just
anxious
had.
to read the book. I'm really anxious to read the book.
Yeah.
Just to hear the story, it's really fascinating, but it's amazing. She was eventually defeated. She is still alive. Is she still
No,
around?
she died, thank God, last year or a year before. But what I did was, I realized that I had to, I couldn't, I could have hired somebody to do this for me. And there's plenty of people you can find to do this kind of work for you if you want it done. Um, but I realized that I had to do it. I had to learn how to do this myself. I just knew that instinctively. So I basically, what I call it, I defanged her.
Wow.
I defanged her.
Yeah.
I basically, like, castrated her power, so to speak.
Hmm. Well,
And
I'm
she
sure
knew
that
it.
was I'm sure that was an amazing, assuming your own, how would you say, like initiating you onto a new level of understanding about how the
Yeah,
reality works.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and yeah, like it takes you up to a new level of having of experience as a soul, having to, I mean, I would assume that's rather rare for a person to go through most of their life under black magic and then being able to become aware of it and then to defeat it.
yeah,
That's quite an initiation, as you said.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and well, you've been really generous with your time. I just kind of I don't want to keep you too long. I just wanted to touch on something that we kind of talked about a little bit, and what we talked about before was, well, you have so much a range of experiences, and you're a director, a writer, and a producer, and you've played Hamlet, maybe the pinnacle of all acting roles.
Yeah.
And I guess my first question was, when you're acting or when you're directing, do you ever use astrology without telling the person? Or when you're writing, do you put in astrological concepts without saying this is an astrological concept? Or do you work with astrology when you're trying to convey something to a person or get a certain reaction? I guess
No,
in that
no,
sense.
no, never. But what I will do is, obviously, look, I swear, relax. So I'll do anybody's chart just out of fascination, because I find every human being so fascinating. For example, I have a very good friend named Tony Lyons, who's the number one fundraiser for RFK Jr. in America, and also America's most courageous book publisher. Tony published The Real Anthony Fauci. He published the book about Trump
Oh,
by
yeah.
Michael, whatever his name was, the lawyer. He published the autobiography of Woody Allen. He's that kind of guy. And I went to see him at Soho House in New York today. And his assistant, he introduced me to his paralegal. And I just did a chart. So I'm always like doing it for relaxation. And for myself, every day I'll look at my own chart, but I'll certainly look at the charts of people I'm working with in order to see the problems in the relationship or potential problems and rewards, but also what they're going through. But I'll never use it to try to influence. I don't think you can. So I don't believe you can influence anybody with astrology, except know when they're going through a rough period, as you just said. With the Mars retrograde, is you're quite right. Globally, is a kind of Debbie Downer energetically.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Get to know who you're working with, and if they have a suggestion, and we were mentioning, we were talking a little bit before, the idea of Shakespeare himself knowing his own deal of astrology, and something that I've learned too, and it's becoming more mainstream, but the idea that Shakespeare was not just this illiterate person who couldn't write his own name, and he never had a book to his name in his will, but he was actually the 17th Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, and
Correct.
it's becoming more mainstream, which is happy to see, because I heard it on a whim at one point, and I looked into it, but there wasn't too much information. But there was a woman, I think her name is Elizabeth Winkler. She just published a book, and it was from a major publisher, bringing this idea more into the mainstream
Hmm.
because it's been so underground. But yeah, it makes so much more sense that the individual who wrote Shakespeare was, he had to have been a Renaissance man. He had to have
Yeah.
been one of the most experienced persons who ever lived, to have the vocabulary. He invented words. He
Yeah.
invented phrases. It wasn't a person with nothing left to his name. And so so I guess the people who are interested in maintaining that story, the people from Stratford, they have a
Yeah.
millions of dollars at stake. They
Oh
can't just
yeah.
say, "Oh yeah, our guy wasn't the guy."
Yeah.
They lose their entire livelihood. So there's people who, yeah, they've got a stake in the claim. Also, the scholars who spend their whole lives saying he was just this genius, and we don't know how, but he just was. And they've written tomes, and they make money, and so they have an interest not to look at the evidence that
Yeah,
it
that's
was a
absolutely
different
correct.
person, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But you were kind of mentioning that Shakespeare was his own kind of astrologer. I
Yeah,
haven't.
absolutely.
That would be such an amazing thing to really research. I really go down rabbit holes sometimes, but
Yeah.
the astrology references in Shakespeare would be such a fascinating topic.
Well, they're all over the place. You know, the fingerprints of the fingerprints of a master astrologer and magician are
Mhm.
all over the place. Look at the Tempest. Look at Macbeth. This man knew about magic
Yeah.
and he knew about astrology. I mean, I played Edmund the Bastard in King Lear, the young Vic, years ago, and his whole opening monologue is how stupid astrology is. That's what he's saying because his brother's into astrology. I mean, the Ides of
Oh,
March. I mean, but you know, literally, Macbeth is about black magic. Obviously, the
yeah.
Tempest is
Lady
about
Macbeth, right?
right. And you know, in my opinion, I mean, Prospero, because the Tempest is such an extraordinary play and so different from any other play in the canon. Prospero is obviously Edward de Vere. It's a whole other subject,
Hmm.
but you know, and de Vere clearly studied under John Dee, Elizabeth's court astrologer and magician, who is very, you know, adept at conjuring up spirits. I mean, we know this from documents. So you know, he did. He
Hmm.
discovered, you know, and certainly the man from Stratford never got near John Dee.
All right.
Uh, so,
Yeah.
you know, I have stories that I'm going to talk about tomorrow. This guy David Vance, because he's also an Oxfordian being a Edward de Vere supporter, because I had an incredible occult experience in the city of Lincoln in England in 1999 about this whole subject, where I experienced irrefutable occult evidence that Edward de Vere was Shakespeare, and that every single person of note in the Elizabethan realm of you know the court, which is a very small society, 500 people, no more, who was involved in this, from Elizabeth II, who was De Vere's mother and lover. That's where it goes. It's
Yeah.
absolutely true.
Wow.
And uh, what's his name? The Salisbury, the prime minister. They all knew, you know, they're all in on this whole thing. It was an extraordinary thing. And De Vere,
Wow.
I think, died of an extremely conflicted person. I know he did. He died in great, great pain because he, while wanting to claim the ownership of the plays and the sonnets, he also felt ashamed that he'd written them. And that all goes back to the whole, to understand, you have to understand the society where, in those days, where to be an actor, to be a writer was okay if you shared your work amongst your fellow aristocrats, but to publish your work or
Yeah.
write for actors.
It was looked down upon to be a playwright. Like as an
Yeah, it's like being a
aristocrat,
whore.
he didn't want to.
It's like being a hooker.
Wow.
Yeah, and also he was Catholic, so he was like, and he was also ashamed that he had, because he had ruined his great name. He had, I mean, he had wasted. He was a wastrel, you know, like he was a conflicted person, and he wasted tremendous amounts of money because he had to support this gift, and he enjoyed life, you know, and he did lose a tremendous amount of money and land as a result of actually supporting himself doing this great venture. That's why the story is so amazing. I'm actually doing a one. I'm writing a one-man show about which I will play De Vere. I'll do it in the Edinburgh Festival next year. So it's a
That would
subject
be
I
great. You know, yeah, that
go
would
on.
be great. There was the movie called Anonymous about De Vere, but
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
couple people that have kind of done one-man shows, you know, playing it, but it would be excellent to take that angle of the conflicted man, because
yeah,
having
yeah.
lost, and it was the sonnets that he wrote towards the end of his life. Was that right? Because the sonnets have this sadness to them of losing someone. But
Oh yeah,
but that would be an amazing show to see,
yeah.
to really dive into that character. It's a fascinating topic because it's the greatest writer in our language, you
That's
know,
right.
and it's amazing to think that this person, maybe having died, no one knowing who he is, or very few people knowing who he is, and there has to be a kind of pain associated with that.
Oh my God.
Um,
Oh my God. Well,
and
read the
have
sonnets again. Read the sonnets again. I mean, because the sonnets look, the sonnets are a private diary. They were never intended to be published. I mean, and I also have intuited how that all came about. But you know, when he says, "My name be buried where my body is," you know, I mean, it's all full of shame
wow,
and shame and pain, and you know, I mean, it's just excruciating confessional document. And to take, and you know, because the bulk of the sonnets are all about his extraordinary love for a beautiful young man. To take that and say he was gay is absolutely absurd. It was his son who he could not acknowledge, the Earl of Southampton. He could not acknowledge it
wow,
because he had the child with Elizabeth. That's where the royal thing
yeah.
is. I mean, De Vere and Southampton were the rightful heirs to the throne of England, and he knew that. He died with that knowledge, and neither one of them could acknowledge it.
And that was the principal motivation why he couldn't be revealed who he was. It was the
Yeah,
controversy around the affair with Elizabeth, as I
yeah,
understand it.
yeah. And I'll tell you what, I'm telling you, I know this for a fact too. Southampton was not the only child. And Southampton and De Vere were not the only children she had. She had at least half a dozen. I mean, the idea of the Virgin Queen is a joke.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you said you're going to put it on next year, hopefully put on a
yeah.
one-man show
In
next year.
August, in the Edinburgh at the Fringe Festival in August in next year.
Excellent. In England. Okay,
Yeah,
excellent. Yeah,
you have to come over and see it.
yeah, I would love to. Well, Gregory, it's been a great privilege to speak with you. I
A
think
pleasure for me.
this is really fun. You've been really, like I said, generous with your time. I don't want to
No,
keep you too
I just
long.
love. It's been really enjoy talking to you, honestly.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot more we can go into. We got
Yeah,
to most of the things I wanted to speak about today, but it would be great to talk another time.
yeah,
More about astrology as things
yeah,
we didn't really talk about Trump. There's some other things in your book that I would like to talk about. We didn't
yeah.
talk about Seth or Jane Roberts. That's
Which is
another
very
fascinating.
important.
Yeah, it's one of the keys. Yeah,
Yeah.
we should talk again about and
Yeah,
really
no,
focus in
I'd
on
love
that.
to. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I just want to say too that if anyone listening to this, I I actually my website, which is gregorypaulmartin.com, has been under construction for way too long, and it's going to be up next week. So that's where you can find me. But if anybody wants to, because I know my chart, I knew this was going to happen now. I mean, everything that I wanted to, everything was robbed from me by Lady Judy Martin is coming back to me like a tsunami because you can't take away from somebody what's theirs. You can take away from it, away from. So, in other words, it's like a tsunami of success. So, But because I enjoy helping people, um, even though I think I said last week I'll never do this again publicly, but if somebody has a real problem, they want to contact me and get my take on it astrologically, they can either go to my website, or I'm going to give you the email I use for astrology, which is a kind of comical email. It's one you wrote to me on, Harry Horse 20. Well, you can write it, harryhorse2024@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Because if I have the time, I will speak to people. Because the odd
Right.
thing
I'll
about
put it
me
in.
doing this publicly is I never thought I'd actually enjoy it, and I have enjoyed it. I've also hated moments of it because I've had some people who are completely nuts, you know, come
Yeah,
into my life.
they can pop out of the woodwork.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, some people, right. But yeah, I'll put your email in the
Sure.
description of this video, and if someone wants to get into contact with you
Yeah.
directly to do a
Oh,
reading.
and the other thing is this, probably more important than astrology, is if anyone wants to do that mind training I developed called Total Power and Dominion, that's more important because it'll take them 30 days. And if they get it and if they do the work, I guarantee you their lives will be transformed so dramatically. It'll shock them. It'll shock them. It'll shock them the way it shocked me when I developed it myself when I was 27 years old. And I was under black magic at the time. So I'll give that up. If I could do that. Excuse me.
Yeah, that was a very interesting. I hadn't heard of that before, but yeah, absolutely as well. So yeah, we can talk another time. And like I
Yeah,
said,
I'd love
maybe
to.
we can talk. I know you're really busy. Maybe about the Seth material but yeah, but there's quite a lot of things that we could really dive into. And
Oh yeah. Well, we should talk some
this
more
is
about
really
Kavir as well. But the Seth thing
yeah.
is very, very important, particularly as to how it relates to what I call total bound dominion. And Neville Goddard is another person who's very important.
Yeah, I think we should that's something that we should really focus on because I know a lot of subscribers to my channel are listeners to to Seth material, and it's
Oh
changed my
yeah,
life a lot. And there's a lot of misunderstandings to it as well. And I
yeah.
really want to get your take on it because you dedicate your book, Watch It Come Down, to Jane Roberts, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
She was one of
Well,
the
because what I was trying to say in that book is that there is no fixed future for America. You see, she's talking about Seth Jane. They're talking about probabilities. There's a chapter in the second book, Which You, Which World, which explains what I'm talking about very clearly. The problem is nobody is certainly the people who produced that video, that sort of rip-off McDonald's version of the Law of Attraction.
secret.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they didn't give anybody any tools. I mean, Joe
Right.
Dispenza, God bless his heart, is trying to do the right thing, is teaching the right thing, but he's basically, it's his business. So he's like doing like retreats for $2,900, with 100 other people. I thought, fuck this. There's a very simple way to develop a practical tool to actually master what Seth and Jane are talking about. And I call it total bound dominion. It's not complicated. And Seth says that very many
Yeah.
times. He
And
says,
Seth,
yeah, your beliefs
Seth
create your
has his
reality.
own yeah, and Seth gives a number of occasions exercises for a person
Yes,
to practice.
that's
And
right.
yeah, I'm gonna go back and look, it's so much material, but I want to go back and find some of the stuff that I really enjoyed and maybe
Yeah,
ask you a few questions and we can talk about it again.
right.
Because it's
And
such an important part. Yeah.
I want to reiterate, I really like you. And why don't you email me your birth information, would you? And I'll show you mine. I'll show you mine.
Great.
That'll be
Yeah, no,
interesting.
I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to take a look at your chart and please
And
let
I'm
me
going to come to
know.
Brazil because I told you too.
Yeah. Whenever you come, let me know
Hey,
beforehand, and I can show you around. I used to live in Rio, so I know my way around there. And if you're around, you need someone to
maybe if
speak
you
Portuguese for
also you
you.
want to roll in the movie with Johnny Depp, we can figure out that too.
Yeah, let me know. I've done my share of acting, and fit me in.
I'd like to
Hopefully, I
see
won't
your
have.
film as well.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. I'm gonna send you my birth info when we get off, and maybe tomorrow. It's getting a little late here, but yeah, let's plan on talking in a couple weeks.
Okay,
There's so much
great.
more. It's been really relaxing for me, and actually, I was a little
Yeah, me
nervous when
too.
we came on, but after talking to you, it's like talking to an old friend. I'm sure you hear
Yeah.
that a lot, but yeah,
Well, it's mutual, my friend.
Yeah, it's a really interesting. All these things are so interesting to speak about.
Right?
But great, Gregory. It's been really fun. Enjoy your evening. Hopefully, you're catching a flight tomorrow to New Orleans.
Yeah. And it's like, I can already feel it. I'm getting on top of all this crap that I was just like letting overwhelm me now. So it's all good.
Okay, good. Well, safe travels, and
Thank you.
yeah, I'll be speaking to you again soon.
All right, man. You take care of yourself.
Take care, Gregory. Okay, talk
All
to you
right.
soon.
God bless.
Okay, have a good evening. God bless. Ciao,
Bye.
ciao.
Bye. Ciao, ciao.